I've always believed that kitchens have a way of capturing memories. The warmth of the oven, the smell of vanilla, and the clinking of spoons stirring cream into sugar. For me, it wasn't just a room where I worked as a pastry chef. It was a refuge, a place where I could measure my emotions in teaspoons, knead out my frustrations, and sweeten my long days with sugar and love. But over time, even the scent of freshly baked cakes couldn't hide the bitterness growing in my heart. Our marriage had started strong. When I married Jonathan, a man 10 years older than me, I believed in forever. But forever had worn thin, frayed by countless failed attempts to conceive and the silence that had grown between us. We tried for years, but nature was cruel. It wasn't just the disappointment of an empty nursery that tore us apart. It was the way he closed himself off. Jonathan could never accept the fact that we'd have no biological children, and his pride wouldn't let him mourn it openly. Instead, he buried it under long work hours and, eventually, resentment. So, when we adopted Alex 2 years ago, I thought that maybe, just maybe, it would fix us. But the opposite happened. Jonathan tried, I'll give him that. He was polite to Alex, ensured he had everything he needed, and paid the bills. But there was a wall between them, a cold, impenetrable barrier that only seemed to grow thicker the closer Alex and I became. I couldn't help but notice the jealousy in Jonathan's eyes when Alex hugged me or called me Mom, with a warmth that Jonathan never returned. It was almost as if our son's presence was a constant reminder of what Jonathan couldn't give me. And then there was Alex himself. 18, tall, and growing into a man faster than I could keep up with. He was loving, thoughtful, and far more intuitive than anyone his age had any right to be. Maybe that's why he noticed what I'd tried so hard to ignore, that the marriage I'd worked so hard to preserve was slipping through my fingers like sugar on a cutting board. Started subtly. Mom, Alex said one afternoon, leaning against the kitchen counter as I piped frosting onto a birthday cake for a client. His voice had that soft, thoughtful tone he used when he wanted to talk about something important. Are you happy? The question startled me. My hands faltered, and a streak of frosting smudged across the cake's edge. I wiped it with a cloth, stalling. Why do you ask that? He shrugged but didn't break eye contact. You just seem different lately. I swallowed, focusing on the cake as though it held the answer. People change, Alex. Life changes. That's not what I meant. He stepped closer, his hand brushing against mine as he reached for a spoon to taste the batter. It's Dad, isn't it? I exhaled shakily. Alex, I don't think. I see the way he looks at you, he said, his voice quieter now. Like he's holding on but doesn't know how. I closed my eyes, the weight of his words sinking in. I had spent years hiding my pain, masking it with cakes and cookies, but Alex saw right through it. His presence had become my sanctuary, the one place where I didn't have to pretend, and that terrified me. I'm fine, I whispered, but my voice betrayed me. Alex set the spoon down and took my hand gently, his warmth seeping into my cold fingers. You don't have to be. For a moment, we stood there in silence, the hum of the oven the only sound between us. And then I did something I hadn't done in years. I let myself cry. Alex didn't say anything. He just pulled me into his arms, his chin resting on top of my head as I sobbed against his chest. It felt so wrong yet so right, to be held like this by my son when my husband, the man who was supposed to be my partner, hadn't touched me in months. I'm sorry, I whispered, pulling away and wiping my tears with the back of my hand. I didn't mean for you to see that. You don't have to apologize. His voice was soft, reassuring. You're allowed to feel things, Mom. I nodded, but guilt gnawed at me. I loved my son more than anything, but there was a line, one I couldn't cross, no matter how comforting his presence felt. As the days turned into weeks, I tried to put that moment behind me. I focused on work, baking for clients and keeping the household running while Jonathan spent most of his days out on deliveries. But Alex's words lingered, their weight growing heavier with each passing day. I found myself seeking his company more often, drawn to the way he made me feel seen in a way Jonathan never did anymore. One evening, while Jonathan was out late, Alex and I sat on the couch watching an old movie. The rain tapped gently against the windows, creating a cocoon of warmth inside the house. Halfway through the film, Alex reached for my hand, intertwining our fingers. It was innocent, a gesture of comfort, but the warmth of his touch sent a shiver down my spine. "I worry about you," he said quietly. His eyes focused on the screen but his thumb gently stroking the back of my hand. I swallowed hard. "You don't need to. But I do." He turned to face me, his expression earnest. "I care about you, Mom. More than you realize." I didn't know how to respond. The air between us felt charged, heavy with unspoken emotions that neither of us dared to name. I pulled my hand away gently, standing up and pretending to fix the throw blanket on the couch. "It's late," I said, avoiding his gaze. "We should get some sleep." Alex didn't argue, but as he stood and brushed past me, his fingers lightly grazed mine, leaving a trail of warmth that lingered long after he was gone. That night, as I lay in bed beside an empty pillow, Jonathan still out on a late-night shift, I couldn't stop thinking about Alex. His words, his touch, the way he saw right through me. The line between right and wrong was becoming blurrier by the day, and I didn't know how much longer I could resist crossing it. But one thing was certain. Something had already changed, and there was no going back. Half an hour later, Jonathan came in, lay down next to me, and fell asleep without even saying goodnight. I was so sad about it, all that I decided to go to Alex's and lay down next to him. I shared with him everything that was hurting in my heart, and he soothed me, stroking my hair as if he knew exactly how to untangle the knots of pain I had kept buried for years. His words were gentle, like a balm, and when he told me I was beautiful, intelligent and strong, I believed him in a way I hadn't believed anyone in a long time. Felt like we were the only two people in the world. The moment he kissed me, the tears that had been streaming silently down my face dried, replaced by something warmer and softer. It wasn't rushed or passionate. It was tender, as if he were trying to heal the parts of me that had forgotten how to be loved. We didn't speak much after that kiss. Instead, we spent the night looking into each other's eyes, lying side by side in a world of our own creation. For the first time in years I felt free. When the sun crept through the curtains and bathed his room in golden light, I knew I had to leave. I pressed my lips gently against his one last time and slipped out of bed, my bare feet making no sound as I padded back to my room. Jonathan was still fast asleep, oblivious to the storm brewing beneath the surface of our home. I lay next to him, staring at the ceiling, my heart torn between guilt and longing. I told myself it was just one night, that I could bury it and move on, but deep down I knew it wasn't that simple. And a few weeks later, my body confirmed it wasn't that simple. It started slowly. My jeans felt snug, my favorite tops didn't sit quite right, and my appetite fluctuated between ravenous and non-existent. At first I brushed it off, blaming stress and poor sleep. But one morning, as I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, I saw the undeniable curve of my stomach. My breath hitched, and my hand instinctively pressed against the soft swell. He knew. The realization sent a jolt of fear through me. I leaned against the sink, my mind racing with possibilities and questions. I had spent years trying to get pregnant with Jonathan, years of negative tests, doctor's appointments, and tears shed behind closed doors. We had stopped trying when it became clear that it wasn't going to happen. And now here I was pregnant. But whose child was it? My mind desperately clung to the possibility that it could be Jonathan's. We had been intimate once or twice in the past few months, though our encounters had been perfunctory, lacking the spark they once had. But I knew deep down that this child wasn't his. It was Alex's. The truth of it weighed on me like a stone sinking in water, dragging me down into depths I wasn't prepared to face. I splashed cold water on my face, hoping the icy shock would clear my thoughts, but the image of Alex holding me that night wouldn't go away. I had crossed a line, and now there was no undoing it. Jonathan was the first to notice. We were sitting at the dinner table when he said it, casually at first, but with an edge that made my stomach twist. "You haven't been eating much lately," he observed, watching as I pushed food around on my plate. "Is everything okay?" I smiled, trying to act normal. "I'm fine. Just tired, I guess. He nodded, but his gaze lingered on me longer than I would have liked. I excused myself to get a glass of water, gripping the kitchen counter to steady myself. My reflection in the window looked back at me, eyes wide and panicked. I couldn't let him find out. But 2 days later he brought it up again. "You've put on some weight," he said, wrapping his arms around me from behind while I was folding laundry. "I mean, you look good, but it's noticeable. Are you sure you're not pregnant?" The way he said it, hopeful and curious, made my heart ache. For years he had wanted this, wanted to see me glowing with life. But not like this. I stiffened in his embrace, struggling to find the words. "I don't think so," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "It's probably just stress." Jonathan turned me around gently, his hands resting on my waist as he studied my face. "Maybe you should take a test just to be sure." I nodded, knowing full well what the test would say. The question wasn't if I was pregnant, it was what I was going to do about it. Jonathan's gaze was soft, hopeful even, and I hated the idea of shattering that hope. But how could I hide the truth forever? Sooner or later he would find out. And when he did, it would destroy him. That night, I sat on the edge of the bed while Jonathan slept beside me, his breathing soft and steady. My hand rested on my stomach, the warmth beneath my palm both comforting and terrifying. There was life growing inside me, a life that could tear everything apart. I thought about Alex, about the way he had kissed me that night and made me feel alive again. Would he want this baby? What would he say if he knew? And what about Jonathan? He would see this as the ultimate betrayal. I could already picture the devastation in his eyes, the anger and heartbreak that would follow. He would leave and I would lose everything, the man who had been my partner for years and the son who had become more than just my son. I was trapped, caught between a love I wasn't supposed to have and the life I was supposed to live. No matter what I chose, someone would be hurt. Someone would leave. The only question was, who would I choose to lose? The morning I took the pregnancy test, the house was eerily quiet, as if it held its breath, waiting for the moment to unfold. I sat on the edge of the bathtub, the cold porcelain seeping through my thin pajama bottoms, my fingers clutching the small plastic stick like it held the power to change my entire world, which in a way it did. The seconds dragged on painfully. I kept glancing down at the little window, praying for clarity but dreading the answer at the same time. And then there was 2 faint pink lines. Positive. I stared at it for what felt like hours, the noise in my head drowning out everything else. It wasn't shock, I had known this was coming, but seeing the confirmation made it real in a way that I wasn't ready for. My breath hitched as tears slid silently down my cheeks. Was I crying out of fear, guilt, or some strange form of relief? I couldn't tell. All I knew was that this tiny life growing inside me had already become a part of me, and I couldn't run from it. I placed the test down on the bathroom counter, washed my face, and stared at my reflection in the mirror. My skin was flushed, my eyes slightly swollen from crying, but beneath the fear, I saw something else, a spark of determination. I wasn't sure where it came from, but it steadied me enough to take the next step. I couldn't tell Jonathan. Not now. Not ever. That afternoon, after Jonathan left for work, I paced the living room, my mind racing. I couldn't keep this a secret forever, but I could choose who I shared it with. And the only person I wanted to talk to was Alex. He was in his room, headphones on, scrolling through something on his phone. The soft hum of music spilled out into the hallway as I stood at the door, hesitating. I had never been this nervous around him before, but now everything felt different. Finally I knocked gently, and he looked up, his face lighting up when he saw me. "Hey Mom," he said, pulling off his headphones. "What's up?" I stepped inside, shutting the door behind me. My heart pounded in my chest as I sat on the edge of his bed, the mattress sinking slightly beneath me. "Alex, I need to talk to you. About something important." He sat up, his smile fading as concern clouded his features. "What is it?" I took a deep breath, my hands trembling slightly as I reached for his. His warmth grounded me, giving me the courage to say what I needed to. I'm pregnant. His eyes widened, and for a moment, he didn't say anything. I felt the air between us thicken, charged with emotions neither of us knew how to handle. But then he squeezed my hands, his touch firm and reassuring. Are you sure? He nodded. I took the test this morning. It's positive. He didn't let go. Instead, he leaned forward and pulled me into his arms, holding me tightly as if he could shield me from the chaos swirling inside my head. I love you, he whispered, his voice steady and full of conviction. No matter what happens, I'm here for you. We're in this together. Tears streamed down my face as I buried my head in his shoulder. I don't know what to do, I admitted. Jonathan, he can't know. He'd never forgive me. Alex pulled back just enough to look me in the eyes. Then he doesn't have to know. We'll figure this out. You're not alone. The weight of his words lifted something off my chest, and for the first time since I saw those 2 pink lines, I felt like I could breathe. But where do we go from here? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He thought for a moment, then smiled softly. Your sister. We'll go to her place like we planned. She'll understand. She's never liked Jonathan anyway, right? I nodded, a small laugh escaping my lips despite everything. My sister, Emma, had always been vocal about her disdain for Jonathan. She thinks he doesn't care about me. Well, she's not wrong, Alex said, his expression hardening slightly. You deserve so much more than what he's given you. I didn't respond, but deep down I knew he was right. Jonathan had once been my everything, but that version of him was long gone, buried under years of neglect and disappointment. And now, with Alex by my side, I realized just how much I had been missing. The next few days were a whirlwind of planning and secrecy. I told Jonathan that the pregnancy test was negative, watching the flicker of disappointment cross his face before he masked it with a forced smile. I figured, he said, brushing it off like it didn't matter. But I knew it did. He had always wanted to be a father, and this would have been a chance to finally have what we had once dreamed of. I hated lying to him, but the alternative was too devastating to consider. So I played my role, pretending everything was fine while secretly packing a bag for my trip to Emma's. Alex helped me with everything, sneaking my things out to the car when Jonathan wasn't around and keeping me calm when the weight of the situation threatened to crush me. The night before we left, Alex found me in the kitchen, staring at a half-finished cake I had been working on for a client. The scent of vanilla filled the air, but it didn't comfort me like it usually did. Hey, he said, leaning against the counter. You okay? I shook my head. I'm scared. He stepped closer, his hand brushing against mine. You don't have to be. We've got this. I looked up at him, searching his face for any sign of doubt, but all I saw was unwavering support. Thank you, I whispered. For everything. He smiled, tucking a strand of hair behind my ear. I'd do anything for you. The intensity of his words sent a shiver down my spine, but before I could dwell on it, he pulled me into another hug. We stood there in the warmth of the kitchen, the hum of the oven the only sound between us, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I wasn't drowning. When the morning came, I kissed Jonathan goodbye and told him I'd be back in a few days. He didn't seem suspicious, just waved me off and told me to have a good time. As Alex and I drove away, the weight of the secret we carried pressed heavily on me, but with each mile that passed, I felt at ease just a little. By the time we arrived at Emma's, I was ready to tell her everything. She met us at the door, her sharp eyes immediately noticing the tension between us. Come in, she said, her voice warm but curious. As we settled in her living room, I took a deep breath and prepared myself for what was to come. I wasn't sure how she would react, but I hoped, I knew that she would understand. After all, if there was one person in the world who had always had my back, it was Emma. And now, I needed her more than ever.